Testing. Hello.
Keep speaking. Keep going.
Hello.
Don't
I
stop,
don't know
stop.
what to say. I'm
Yeah.
testing the mics. Testing.
So that's
Testing
working.
the mic.
So it's picking up the audio there, which is good.
Yeah.
Stop moving in here, but online it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
You might drop the.
This is really a nice opportunity to be together as part of an event which is taking place this week here at IDS. I'm Peter Taylor. For those online, I'm acting director of the Institute, and I'm really happy to have in the room with us a group that have come together, been thinking and deliberating a lot, I can say, on the topic of democratizing science, technology, and innovation in agri-food systems. So in a moment, the most important thing is that colleagues who have been involved in this initiative are going to share some of their experiences, because we have a number of colleagues in the room, and some will share their particular experiences, but there are others also here in the space who are also contributing equally to this process and helping us to really engage with these fundamental issues. And we've been thinking a lot over the last few days about how agri-food systems really enable different forms of knowledge and different kinds of experience of people in different places and different contexts to come together in ways that actually help to foster and support science, technology, and innovation in agri-food systems. We've been deliberating a lot about, what are the different kinds of purposes of agri-food systems and how can we imagine those? And this is part of a bigger endeavor which is being led by the Office of Innovation within the Food and Agriculture Organization, who are really taking forward a wider conversation about these kinds of issues. And the conversation we're having around democratization within this space of science, technology, and innovation in agri-food systems is one that we feel is really important to bring, because essentially we recognize that there are some fundamental challenges at the moment, and that there is exclusion. There are certain ways of thinking and practices which are pushing agendas and moving towards certain futures for food and nature and people's livelihoods and lives, which are not necessarily really integrating different kinds of knowledge and different kinds of experience. So today we've just invited some of our colleagues who are participating in this process. This week we're having what we call a write shop, and the purpose of this is to draw on some initial ideas that we've already been assembling to try to bring this together in the context of a chapter which is going to appear in a report which will be published next year by FAO. And in a moment, our colleague Fabrizio from FAO will say a little bit about that to give the bigger picture. So we're just going to have short presentations from each of our colleagues who are here. And that will be an opportunity, just sort of 5 minutes each, just to share some of their perspectives about why this is an important issue, both within their own context and why it's also an important issue more globally. So in terms of the sequence that we're going to go through, we'll first hear a few words from Fabrizio Bresciani, who's Senior Innovation Officer at the Office of Innovation at FAO. Then we will hear from Bettina Diamet, and Bettina is Executive Director of STIPRO, which is the Science, Technology and Innovation Policy Research Organization in Tanzania. Then we will hear from Annabelle Marin, who is the leader of our Business Markets in the States cluster here at IDS. We will then hear from, let me get my sequence right, Aditya Alta from the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies, where he's head of research. Then we will hear from Margarita Gomez, who is Executive Director of Southern Voice, which is a network of think tanks that IDS is increasingly partnering with, and which STIPRO and others are also part of that wider network of think tanks. And then we're also going to hear some perspectives from Cheshire Wetasinya, who is with Prolinova. And I won't ascribe a title, Cheshire, because I realize that your organizational structure is really interesting, but Prolinova is promoting local innovation in ecological agriculture and natural resources management. And then we're also going to hear from, last but not least, Javier Mateo Vega, who is Senior Director of Partnerships, CGIAR. So, but also in the room, I just want to highlight other colleagues who are working on this from IDS, Joe Howard, Jody Thorpe, Lydia Cabral, Elise Wach, and also we have Alvaro Espinoza as a researcher at GRADE in Lima, in Peru. And we also have online, I think, our colleague Delgama Chulumbata Degi, who's Agricultural Research Officer at FAO. And so this is really a collective effort where everyone is working together to help us to try to elaborate what our understanding is of democratizing science, technology, and innovation in agri-food systems. So I don't want to take up more space because I think what's really exciting today is to hear from colleagues who have been contributing to this thinking and identifying some ways forward. We'll share those perspectives and then we'll open up for a conversation with those who are in the room and also those who are online. So Fabrizio, if I could turn to you first and I'll pass you the mic.
Thank you very much, Peter. So it's a welcome opportunity to introduce a little bit the background of this ATIO publication, but it's not only the publication, as I will explain in a few minutes. And I would really like to thank the hospitality of of Peter's team and and IDS. So just to take a little bit a step back and look at the bigger picture, it's clear that the transformation of agri-food systems is a big topic on the agenda related to the SDG and the broader 2030 agenda. It's clear that agri-food systems play a critical role in terms of achieving sort of the broader goals that the Agenda 2030 has set. And within that agenda, it is also quite clear that technology and innovations are going to be playing a fundamental role, even more than has been the case in the past. FAO strategic framework makes an explicit focus on the role of technology and innovations. And as a result of that, 2 years ago, FAO published its science and innovation strategy, which basically lays out some of the critical areas where the organization would like to engage in terms of supporting an increased or a better use, let's say, of technologies and innovations for agri-food system transformation. So one area is definitely the one of working together with the member countries in terms of creating the conditions, the mechanisms, the opportunities for improving the uptake of appropriate technologies and innovations. The second one is to actually also support member countries in terms of laying out the policy framework, the institutional framework for making better use of science, technology, and innovations. And the third one is also to improve FAO's capacity to provide those kind of services and support to member states. And so that's one part of the sort of the institutional things that have been happening in FAO that have been motivating the conceptualization of the ATIO report. The other aspect is that also at the UN level, more broadly, there is the UN 2.0, or the Quintet of Change agenda, which puts a lot of emphasis on the ability of the UN system and its agencies actually to use foresight, analysis, and horizon scanning as a sort of critical tools for supporting member states in their endeavors and in their policy developments. And so the combination of these two things basically led within FAO and within the Office of Innovation that has recently been created only just 3 years ago to the idea of coming up with a publication that could become a sort of a reference point for the global community on on the role of technologies and innovations in supporting the transformation of agri-food systems. And this is ATIO, Agri-Food Systems, Technologies and Innovations Outlook. So maybe we can move to the next. Oh yeah, that's right. Sorry, I forgot that I've been given the. So the ATIO initiative has basically two components. One is the publication, and we are here these days in IDS to work on one of the chapters, which we believe is actually a fundamental chapter, which has to do with the democratization of science and technology innovation processes, as Peter mentioned. And the second one is an open access knowledge base. So we realize that there is a huge data gap related to technology and innovations for the agri-food sector. And by using artificial intelligence tools, but also by crowding in information about technology innovations through partnerships with farmer organizations down at the field level, we would like to make sure that we can actually be able to harvest a lot of information that can be used for policy analytical purposes. The coverage of this report is going to be, the focus is on low and middle income countries. We are not focusing only on technological innovations. This is an important point. It covers institutional, social, and policy innovations. And we are not focusing exclusively on the production side in the agri-food sector, but no, we are looking also at the post-farm gate processes. To learn more, if you're able to get a picture of this QR code, that will lead you to some more information related to this initiative. Thanks.
Thanks, Fabrizio. And it's, yes, absolutely. Those online and also in the room, if you'd like more information, that will be available and we're happy to share it with you. But I think, thanks, Fabrizio, for giving us that overview of how this fits. And now I think it's really good just to hear from colleagues who are contributing to this about why is this an important issue? You know, why is this something that we should actually be thinking about? And putting it into this report, as you say, Fabrizio, in a way that actually creates a foundation for many of the other discussions and engagements that I think the ATIO exercise intends to shape. So, Petrina, if I could turn to you.
Yeah, thank you. I've already been introduced. My expertise actually is in STI system analysis at different levels, global, local, national, and even sectoral systems. And the issue of that is central to what we are talking about democratization is really not my, but I came to like it for the reasons that you will learn. And what I'm saying is that before we are talking about democratization of STI, I think we should step back a bit. We have to kind of talk about democratization of the food system itself, because we are talking about the food system because we are not happy. Why we are here? We are not happy the way the system is functioning, in the sense that it is not giving us enough food. It is it's not giving us enough income. It is not operated in such a way that it takes care of the environment. So those are the challenges that we have, and that is why we are talking about it. And there are actually some three, in line with these challenges, there are three types of interventions currently, if you read in literature, and also my experience. Intervention to make sure that the system is sustainable, basically addressing the environmental issues. The system is actually producing enough food that is nutritious and income. But the thing is, the challenge is that this is not even done in a democratic way, depending on what are the needs of people and farmers in different contexts. Because agri-food system is actually context-based. The way the system operates is different in different countries, especially when you talk about the high-income countries and low-income countries. The system is different. It depends on socioeconomic situation, depends on the culture. So if you are not democratizing it, like for instance, I know Africa, I know farming, I am farming myself. So it's not only from reading, you have experience. The major challenge that Africa has when it comes to agriculture is actually productivity. It's very low productivity, has not increased over the past 60 years. It's the line almost flat. So it's the issue of, but when you look at now the interventions globally, even in Africa, it's about global issues. It's about environment. We are not saying that environment is not important. It is important. But if you are emphasizing environment and not even talking about this pressing need of the people, even the technology that you are talking about, farmers will not adopt it. They will not take, because technology is supposed to serve the purpose. So we have to democratize the intervention first, to listen to the voice of the people and to address the needs of the people in different contexts, because the needs are different. So that first level of democratization. When you talk about now, I'm coming now to STI. When we talk of STI system, if you analyze the STI system, always the center of analysis is the innovator. It's the innovator, it's who is innovating. In this, for the industrial sector, it is the company, it is the firm. For the farmer, for the agricultural sector, it's the farmer. But look what we normally do. We do not look at the farmer to know what kind of technologies they need. We go to R&D. And that is why we are supposed to be talking about democratization, because the farmers, the analysis has to start with the farmer. What do they know? What is the current knowledge? We have to start with the current knowledge of the farmers, and then we can then relate on who in the system, what actor should provide what research organization should provide the farmer, so that the farmer becomes innovative for their purpose for agriculture.
Thank you, Betrina. And I really appreciate everyone is dealing with some complex issues in a short period of time. But I think linking it to your own personal connection and the fact that you are yourself a farmer, as well as the executive director of a think tank that works on these issues, is a really important connection between these different kinds of knowledge and experience that we've been talking about actually during the last 2 days. So this idea of democratization, it's not new, I think would be fair to say. It's emerging out of quite a history of different kinds of work, and we've been talking a lot about that. Annabelle, could you share with us some of your reflections around this, and what is it we're talking about, and why is this important?
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. So yeah, I will share with you a little bit of what we have been discussing around this issue of democratization of science and technology and innovation for agri-food, in making our proposal to address several of the issues that Betrina introduced. So first, about the object, what is that has to be democratized? And then I will discuss a little bit about some questions about the process, how it has to be implemented, and share with you a little bit of our discussions around these issues. So first, in relation to the object, important to consider that when we are talking about democratization of knowledge, innovation systems, we are talking about democratization of two things at least. One is decisions, and the other is knowledge. And both things are important when we are trying to think democratization, because both decisions and knowledge tend to be concentrated in a few hands, powerful, in general, those who have power within the systems. And so they normally are the ones that are taking most decisions regarding which kind of knowledge to produce, which purpose, which objectives. And then the ones that own this knowledge around the system, in general, have and find ways to restrict access. And so we are talking about the two kinds of things here. And the purpose of then democratizing these two aspects, both decisions and knowledge, of course, are connected, is that then we have a system that is producing knowledge that can serve different purposes, and not just the purposes and the objectives and the demands of a reduced group of persons within the system, the ones that have power. And because why this is important is not just because of static consequences, not distributional, but also dynamic, because if decisions are taken only in relation to the interests of a reduced group of people, then the directions in which innovation can evolve are very restricted. And what we're going to have is a system that cannot deal with the medium, longer term challenges of the system. That's what we know. And so that's in relation to the object. Then we've also discussed quite a lot within the group several questions in relation to the process. So for example, who has to be involved in this democratization process? And in this space, again, very often decisions are taken by experts. The experts are the ones that have power. And so in the efforts that have been made already about democratization, we have more kind of timid process, which are only about involving different kind of experts. So you can go to much more ambitious objectives, which is involve the people that is affected by the new knowledge, the new technology, the people that are users of this technology and knowledge, or more in general, we can, and there has been efforts of involving what is called ordinary people, everyone, or citizens that can have a view on that. But then the second question is about what is over which issues is this democratization? And here again, connected to the issue of experts, what is very common argues, okay, we can only democratize or democratize decisions regarding issues where people have expertise. And so again, expertise become a barrier here, because one of the arguments that you cannot distribute decisions if people don't understand the topics. And so in issues related to knowledge production, this is very typical. But the reality there is that on the one hand, for a lot of decisions that have to be taken, it's not necessary that everyone has the same expertise. And also expertise can be shared and can be translated. And we know that from specific processes already going on. And in the third place, there are different types of knowledge that are required, and some of them normally are not considered. So for example, farmers' knowledge, or those that are being affected by new technologies. In the case of, for example, the use of pesticides, the people that is affected by the pesticides that are used in a region, then they have knowledge about this process that is very useful for decision making and normally is not considered. So there are different kinds of knowledge, and all these knowledges should be considered, and that's what we also are proposing here. Then the other question is, to what end? What is the purpose of this democratization? And I mean, a very general statement is to say for the common good. So this is normally the big argument. But then more specific things that could be done and that we are discussing within the group are, of course, because of issues of justice, of equity, of including those that are normally marginalized, but also more instrumental ones that, for example, giving legitimacy to the processes. Okay. And then also, reduce risks, gain efficiency, and so on. I was going to say something about the how, but I will stop here, and then maybe in the discussion might come up. Sorry.
Thanks, Annabelle. And the how question is definitely important, and we will come to that because that's also part of our deliberation of this elusive goal of a more democratized future as something that we are grappling with. What are the kinds of changes? And I suspect others in our panel will also share some thoughts about that. ATIO, you've been involved in this conversation as well, and you're coming from the Indonesian context. Indonesia has a very, very long history of farmer-led innovation, of participatory approaches. Perhaps you could say a little bit about, from your perspective and context, why is this this question of democratization we're discussing important, and how does this connect with issues that you're seeing from your perspective?
Thank you. So in the part of the section that I co-wrote, also together with some colleagues back home, I think they're also joining. So shout out to them, to Alejandro and Julia. So we tried to outline some examples, not just from Indonesia, but also from other places, both about innovations coming out of traditional knowledge or indigenous systems, but also examples of democratization in action of how some spaces, or there have been some efforts to better democratize the space and give the voice so that these traditional knowledge can be discovered, they can be acknowledged, and can be known to the mainstream system. So I think the main point that we make in the section is that while there are numerous examples of decision-making, knowledge generation, and ownership structure that have been more inclusive to broader social participation, they tend to be isolated in their specific local contexts. And meanwhile, the opportunities to scale and mainstream participatory innovation are still limited. So we mentioned several examples, very scattered at this point, I think, as we are developing the draft. So from all over the world, we stumbled upon literature articles about how farmers make use of otherwise unvaluable resources, such as waste, for example. They use it as inputs. And there are also practices, for example, composting with pest, and they have been found to generate benefits in terms of productivity and access, and also more ecologically sustainable. We also engage with examples, I think, specifically to ask the question of whether institutions such as the value chain or governance have accommodated or instead challenged more democratic space to innovation. I think at the current draft right now, we use an example from India, but there's also something that we keep at the back of our mind, an example from the dairy farms in Indonesia. So in the examples, we use the case of technology transfers in India and in Indonesia. And in both examples, we see that while vertical coordination from the value chains have contributed to the use and dispersion of modern tools, modern farming management, modern practices, the benefit seems to be selective, where larger, more commercial farms, they tend to be assisted more and benefit more than smaller farms or those with very small number of cattle, for example. So yeah, we and there are also examples about the how this space there are examples of democratization of the space as well. So there have been efforts, for example, to better acknowledge and recognize these indigenous contribution. For example, by making an inventory of knowledge or counter patenting local practices. But again, as the point that I made in the beginning, that these are still scattered examples. And they're currently very limited in scope and application. But the idea, I think, is that as we are crafting the future outlook, which is something that I think Margarita will talk about later, we can probably draw some lessons from these examples and also identify what enable and constrain the more mainstreaming of these examples.
Great, thank you, Aditya. And you've given a very nice segue to Margarita now, who we're all, of course, thinking about futures. But Margarita, I think it would be just great to get your perspectives and also to perhaps connect it a little bit to the network of think tanks that you lead, who are thinking all the time about futures and alternative ways to get there. How can this work we're engaged in help us move towards some sort of future state which addresses some of the challenges that we've heard about already?
Thank you, Peter. So I'm going to start first saying thank you to IDS for organizing this space, to open also the conversation, to bring some innovations in the way that we are creating this report, and to our members like Cipro from Tanzania, Ships from Indonesia, and Grade from Peru, who are also engaging in this conversation. So we are a network of 70 think tanks in the Global South, with a representation in 35 different countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And the reason why we exist is because we saw that many of the development issues have been defined by Global North actors and global North governments. And these are issues that are affect the global South. And we really, when Southern Voice was created 11 years ago, it was to fight what we are discussing today, to tackle like the knowledge asymmetry that is there, and also to bring more actors to the conversation. And just like bringing the conversation to the STI, to science, technology, and innovation in the food system, I would like to organize my thinking in boxes. So like 6 different boxes. And the first box is who, and I will put this box in the center. Who are we bringing to the conversation, and who are we bringing to discuss these issues that are important? And here I will say, for us as Southern Voice and like the think tanks that we represent, it's important to bring the low middle income researchers that usually they are left out, but also the farmers that are the ones that we fight, like at the end, we are affecting. So in the future, when we think in the future that is our present, is we think to put in the center, these individuals, organizations, groups that are usually left out. Then the second box for me will be approaches. And usually there are some approaches that are privileged over others. So when we are thinking about the approaches, it's like we would like to see different approaches coming together and having this conversation, and more like a tool of approaches that we can use depending of the different issues that we are discussing and thinking about. The next box will be the process. And for me, the process is, instead of having a process where there is just unilateral decisions, we have more deliberative processes where we have participation of farmers, local organizations in the whole science, technology, and innovation process, having a voice in the priorities, in the agenda, in the way that the resources are managed. The next box will be research. And when we think about how can we do or democratize the way that we create that science, technology, and innovation, we also need to think about different ways that to do research. And research that is more co-creative, that is like the co-production of the research, and where also many of the innovations are coming already from the local the local realities and the global South. So how can we scale up, and someone was saying scale out also the innovations that are already being implemented in the global South. The next box will be resources. And resources is very important because we know that who manage the money or the resources has a lot of influence in the agenda, in the priorities. So something that we have been pushing a lot, and we expect also to change this in the very near future, is who is the one that is managing the resources for these policies that usually affect and are implemented in the global South. And my final point will be that it's not a box, this is a streamline, or is happening in every box that I just mentioned, is power. And we need to recognize that always there is a power asymmetry in the whole conversation. And it could be, to put it very simplistic, it could be North and South, but it could be also gender. It could be also different of languages, technical language or languages. So there are all these power asymmetries always happening, and always I think that we should make that visible if we really want to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Margarita. And I'm sure given that this is IDS, and I'm sure many of those here and those listening were kind of waiting for box 6 power, because that's something that we think a lot about, and it's at the root of very many of the issues that we draw on. It's interesting too, you know, other items that you mentioned there in your list of potential sort of categories around resources. Obviously, there's a big debate right now about localization. You know, a number of funding agencies, for example, are, including in the UK, are really thinking about that. But of course, there are many questions about, well, what does that really mean in practice, and what are the power issues relating to that? It's not just about transfer of resources, it's about who gets that, how decisions are then made. And of course, as you know, Cheshire, who I'll invite to speak to just now, raised a number of times, we have an ongoing, you know, very vibrant discussion at IDS around decolonization and around questions of, you know, historic structural inequities which run very deep, and we recognize these are very present. How do we actually make progress to addressing those? And I'm sure we're going to come to the how question that you raised in a moment, Annabelle, as well. So we've heard so far from some of our contributors in the room, and thanks to Aditya too for recognizing that we have colleagues who are contributing who are not with us here in the room as well. You have colleagues back in Indonesia and others who are part of this process. But as part of this week, we also invited 2 colleagues to come and join us who could share perspectives from different arenas and bringing different sets of concerns, which it's really important for us to listen to. We're very conscious of, you know, who are we? Who are we as a group speaking? Well, we don't represent everybody. We're bringing a certain set of views, but can we broaden those views? Can we engage with other voices, actors, perspectives and sets of experience and knowledges as we go through this endeavor? So we have 2 colleagues who've kindly joined us this week and have been really important contributors to our own deliberations. And Cheshire, if I could come to you first and invite you to share.
Thank you. Let me see. All right, so I was already introduced, and I'll say it again for people who maybe didn't quite catch it. I come here from Prolinova, promoting local innovation in agroecology and natural resource management. It's a global community of practice, and it is a multi-stakeholder partnership at all different levels, from global to regional to national to local. And I think that all my colleagues have been talking about the dominant science, technology, innovation system thus far, and how are we going to democratize that? And we are coming from a space where, seeing my gray hair, you would know that we've had all of that, and we said at a certain time, this doesn't work. So we are going to do it differently. So in Prolinova, farmers are the scientists. We go and look at farm innovators as our entry point, and then we gather all the agricultural research and development stakeholders to actually engage with the farmer to improve what they are doing. Because what they come up with is culturally appropriate, it uses the local resources, it is ecologically sustainable, it's socially just. So we are now I'm here to say we are a glimmer of hope. We have been able to do this. We are saying that in food systems, farmers are the most important people. They are the people who have the knowledge. None of us in the system actually farm. Okay, Bettina must be doing, but she doesn't do farming as a major livelihood. So basically, we've been able to be this alternative system. So what I'm here to say is also, there are many such alternative systems in the world, in the real world. And so maybe we need to learn from them. I could share some of the experiences of how we have struggled, perhaps, with trying to get people from that world to work with us in the way we work, respecting farmers, celebrating farmers, speaking their language, getting rid of our academic titles and saying we are all equal. It requires a major change of mindset. It requires a whole different way of being schooled. And I think there's a lot of changes that need to be brought if we are actually going to democratize. So I'm just here to share a lot of experiences that I have on behalf of the farmers who couldn't be here. I mean, at short notice, we can't ever get somebody from Africa or Asia as a farmer to come here to the UK. So I'm the closest. So I'm actually being very humble because I'm actually talking on their behalf. So that's basically what I wanted to say, that there is other things happening in the real world. And one more thing I would like to mention, there's a lot of change happening in the world. There's climate change, there's conflicts, there's a lot of changes where the traditional formal system can't get you quick answers for, because they are a system where if you want to come up with a new variety, for instance, you need 2 years of research to do it. Whereas farmers can't wait. They need to change tomorrow. And then you have to change the system where farmers come up with solutions and you need to support them. So that's what we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheshire. And I think you've brought more than a glimmer of hope in this few days. One of the things we've been discussing actually, and ATIO also shared some examples, is that there is a wealth of experience, there is a wealth of knowledge and ideas and practices which have been happening for quite some time. We have colleagues in the room who are deeply immersed in long histories of working on participation and participatory methods. And one thing that's really come out of our conversation so far is not to lose those histories. There is change already happening. There are things to learn from, and how we build on things which are already happening, but often are not seen or not recognized or not valued, is part of the challenge, I think, that we're collectively trying to address. So thanks, Chesh, for that. So finally, from our speakers on this rather long table, which again is not representative of the whole group, because there are more of us in the room. Javier, you have a role within one of those larger organizations that I think has a hugely important role in research and science, technology, and innovation in agriculture. And we've had some really interesting conversations this week. Perhaps you could share some of your perspectives about perhaps what some of the challenges and also some of the opportunities that you see.
Well, thanks so much, Peter. And I wanted to echo the words of my colleagues in thanking you and IDS and the colleagues from IDS for hosting us, and to Fabricio and FAO and Degi Online for opening the space for this really important dialogue. As Peter mentioned, I come from CGIAR, which is the largest global partnership for agricultural research and development, really focused on food, land, and water systems transformation. And we certainly qualify in that group known as the powerful in terms of our ability to influence and inform both the agenda for research and development in this particular space, as well as the venues and the utilization of resources. So we certainly fall under that category. And so I'm approaching that from that particular perspective in terms of large international organizations. I'm not just speaking about CGIAR. And what I'm going to say about CGIAR, what I'm about to say is not endemic to our organizations, endemic to large international research organizations, research for development organizations around the world that are often called out for not being such great partners. And I'm going to use a few words that might generate a knee-jerk reaction from some of you, and it would certainly from my colleagues, but I have heard reference to these organizations in public spaces where they say that we have a tendency to supplant national agricultural research and innovation systems or compete with them for resources, or there may be a tendency to utilize some partners as sources of cheap technical labor, and that often these organizations have misaligned research for development agendas that don't necessarily fit with national or regional development and research priorities. And so this is once again a caricature of the reality, because of course they play a fundamental role in the research for development space and making very important contributions. But some of these problems do pop up and some of these accusations do take place. So there are, in my opinion, three seemingly pervasive and intractable conditions or constraints towards these organizations playing a fundamental role in affecting changes in terms of democratizing the STI space. And these are, I think, they're going to sound instrumental, but they're profound. And so the first one has to do with the way that they recruit and retain talent, and the hiring mechanisms that are almost always exclusively in favor of ways of knowing that are sort of the classical positivist approaches to knowledge. And when you're hiring with that lens, you can become quite insular to other ways of knowing. The second one is incentive systems that take place within these organizations, right? And so if you measure success as a professional based on your number of publications or your contributions to fundraising, or to a lesser degree, how your research findings are either being uptaken or scaled out, then how about how you go about your work, whether it embeds principles and behaviors and rituals of democratization, really doesn't matter, right? Because you're not being assessed for that. So if including, or at least considering other ways of knowing is not part of your incentive system, then it can remain off your radar screen, and that's a risk. The other one is the funding models for these organizations. You know, democratizing STI, as Margarita referenced, also means democratizing how funds are procured and managed. And most organizations of this type are project-based, and they function on short funding, or relatively short funding cycles. And research get to eat what they hunt, right? And so it's very difficult to share the bounty when you're watching for yourself, or you're watching out for your teams, your organization, or the systems that you're embedded in. And after you've accounted for all of that, then you think about others. And so that can also be a risk in terms of the democratization of STI. So overcoming these three constraints is enormous challenging. I'm not going to venture any solutions, because that's beyond what we can cover right now. However, I believe there might be three levers of change. We talked about them earlier today that could drive behavioral change. And if one can demonstrate that democratizing STI can do one or more of the following three things, then I think you can make some headway. And the first one is, if you can show that democratizing STI will mitigate risk for these organizations, you're in the game. If you can show that it will maximize rewards, whatever way you want to measure that, it can be in terms of publication, adoption of technologies, innovations, et cetera, you're in the game. And if you can also demonstrate that democratizing STI will help to lower transaction costs and increase efficiencies, then you'll be listened to, right? So these are, of course, are very challenging levers to play with. And there's many different tactics that you can employ within those particular three levers of change. But I think that's where you can start to make some difference. So tampering with these three levers of change could potentially unlock solutions and certainly drive greater democratization in STI.
Thank you, Javier. And I have to say, this is without any doubt the most disciplined panel I have ever sat with, who've all managed to convey some really interesting and important ideas in a very short space of time. So thank you to all of you for sharing it. I think this last point that you raised, Javier, was one that actually, of course, we were talking about this morning, which is about, you know, what are these kinds of levers of change? What will encourage change towards this different kinds of future? Because we've outlined a lot of the challenges. Margarita's also outlined some, you know, let's say elements of a future that we could aspire to, that we would like to see things done differently. How are we going to sort of move that change along? And I just wondered if anyone in the panel, or indeed any of our other colleagues in the room, before we open up to questions more widely, would just like to share some initial thoughts about this question of how. Annabelle, I think you were poised, had you had another minute to share with us. So maybe we could just start with you, but then we can open it up as well to colleagues who are in the room. And if you do have questions online, I think please do share them, and we'll do our best to respond to them as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just thinking precisely on the how because of your comments. And of course, here we are talking at least, again, about two things, like top-down processes taking place in the formal systems. So in existing institutions, and I think your points you made are very important. We've seen the same in science systems in general, like there are supporting researchers we are only evaluated about publications, but not about impact, for example, or working with stakeholders. And this is a big restriction in terms of what we are talking here. So this is part, I mean, the how, in terms of, there is a lot to be discussed about this formal system and the top-down processes, in which then the issue is how do you involve other kinds of stakeholders with diverse interests, and how then this involvement, managing the power asymmetries, might bring changes. So like in steps. No? So all the things are involved in this discussion. But then there is the bottom up, that actually when you look at the evidence is what has had, I would say, probably more impact, because and what we say bottom up, we are talking about all these processes of democratization that happen because activists, social movements, and people affected by new knowledge technologies and so on have started process where they claim this participation, and they have evidence, they have counter evidence about processes that are not recognized by the formal system, and so they kind of force themselves in this through activism to have an impact on decisions, and we have seen very interesting examples of that. And probably when we look at the examples in our report, actually quite a lot of them come from this kind of bottom up. So the big challenge then is there, how do you bring all these issues together, and how you also can have something to say about this both top down, bottom up, but also about the integration of these different things that are going on. So that's what I have to say about the how.
Great, thanks, Annabelle. Others who'd like to chip in, perhaps on the how. Anybody like to come in? Yes, Cheshire.
One of the things that will be very important is Javier just told you that what kind of institutions are these big institutions. And I think decolonizing these institutions is very important, because they perpetuate this way of doing things because they are hierarchical. They're arranged in a way that it's very top-down flows of funding, whatever. So I think that is required, and I think education has to be sort of adjusted, changed to prepare agricultural professionals who are able to look at farmers as equals and not as people who are scientists who think that farmers don't know anything. So there's a big chunk of work to be done in education. And I think that that's a big job to do. It will also require sort of political support. I mean, you have to have the ability to get such a thing done. I mean, changing a curriculum within a university in the global south is very difficult because it follows the same sort of forms that is done in the global north. And so what we're doing is disruptive ways of doing it now, by saying, don't worry about changing curriculums because then you'll get into problems. Just plug it into what you're doing now. So you're finding ways of actually dealing with the existing system, but you also have to realize that it has to be transformed. So it's a big job to do. But unless you do it, I don't think you can really talk about democratization of.
Great, thanks. Margarita, did you have a thought? No, not right now. Let's open it up. Colleagues, those of us who are in the room also, do we have any questions online at the moment? So we'll invite them if anybody would like to share them. But colleagues in the room who've been part of this conversation, I think one thing that's characterized our conversation so far is many views and diverse views about things. And one of our very practical challenges is how to essentially result in a chapter which is conveying this, but in clear, concise ways, and also which will speak to and engage with, or open the possibility to engage with, different actors and different audiences. And that is quite a challenge. But Fabrizio, I'll let you come first, and then let's open it up.
I was reflecting on the how, and I think that an area is the one of data and what we mean by developing evidence. Policymakers nowadays, they always are keen in saying, oh, we have taken decisions based on evidence. So there is a question about whose evidence, how that evidence is developed. And the other important point is the dearth of data that we are facing, right? And then when I'm saying we might have a lot of anecdotal data, case studies, examples of things happening here and there, but in terms of a systematic generation of data, that can give visibility to what is happening at the grassroots level is quite important. So that's actually the second component of the ATIO initiative I was referring to at the beginning, the ATIO knowledge base, where on one side, we will use, or at least the plan is to use artificial intelligence tools to basically, get from all existing, and these are mainly formal sources of information, evidence about technologies that are emerging and that we can expect to have an impact in over the next 10, 20 years. But the other aspect of that knowledge base is the one that we would like to develop in collaboration with apex farmer organizations that intends to go down to the grassroots level and crowdsource information from there and have it systematized and presented in a way that can also be used for policy processes. Oftentimes, we hear a lot about the term the policy science interface. That's where mechanisms by which policymakers and scientists meet and talk to each other. And we often have the feeling that the third element of that interface, which is society, is actually missing, right? And so, but to enable that a third actor to be there, we also need to be able to generate the kind of data they can actually use in their in these interfaces, right?
Thanks, Fabrizio. And just to say, against the backdrop of that, there's a very colossal rainstorm taking place here, which is creating interesting sound challenges, but hopefully everybody can still hear. Let's open it up. Comments, thoughts? Yes. Yeah, okay, we've got several. Oh, sorry, I'll let you pass the mic. Yeah.
Thank you so much I was listening online till now. Very insightful panel. I come from India. I've been working in food systems for the last 5 years. And there are 2 states in India, Punjab and Haryana, which are considered kind of like the cereal baskets of the country. And I want to understand your perspectives on what should the thinking be, or what should the research be when we are trying to decide what kind of technologies, whether social or fertilizers or any kind of input or output technologies that we incentivize. So currently, during the Green Revolution, we had to incentivize fertilizers and certain kinds of seeds because India was facing a food security crisis. Now, 30 years later, we are food secure, but we are having groundwater depletion, soil is being degraded because of certain incentives that were put in place. Now, removing those incentives are it's a very politically sensitive matter. So going forward, what are the kind of science, what's the kind of thinking that should be put in to incentivize different kind of science, different kind of technologies, or how do we bring farmers onto that policy-making table so that the kind of decisions, they can be part of those decisions on what should be incentivized and what should not?
Brilliant, thanks. It is a bit challenging with the noise on the roof at the minute, but let's take 2 or 3 questions and then. Yeah, so just to check that I get what you said, because it's just purely the rain. We don't have a shortage of rain today anyway, even though we do it other times. I think the core of your question was, given the range of needs for people in many communities, and these are changing now in the world as we know today, we know that a lot of investment has been made in certain technologies. What technologies should we be incentivizing now? But also, how should different groups, communities, actors be involved in the processes which identify what to incentivize? Is that a fair? Okay, thank you.
My question would be to you, ma'am. You raised a very fundamental question that what kind of STI should we look to democratize, whether the dominant STI or the farmer-centric and locally sourced STI. So, but we did not hear a lot of examples. So I would just want to know from examples and from your experiences, what kind of an STI would that be, which you sort of promote and you are in favor of democratizing, the locally sourced STI or the farmer-centric STI?
Great, thank you. Let's keep going. I think, Joe, your hand was up as well. And Alvaro.
Thank you. That's one question. How do we know that democratization in science, technology, and innovation is actually a priority for farmers? That's it.
Thanks, Alvaro. And we might come back to ask you to answer that question for us as well. Okay, let's take, if it's okay, we'll just take a couple more because I think we've got, oh, yeah. Lydia and Joe, yeah.
So mine was about the role of global institutions, actually. So I was thinking that part of the challenge, and I love what you say about changing education, but that is such a long view thing. I mean, we can do things by stealth, but if we're going to, which is actually what we do here as well, because we can't change the Sussex curriculum very easily. So we put things in by stealth, but that kind of longer kind of changing the next generation of people going into agricultural training and so on, extension working, is a long. So then I think, so who can actually make long-term plans and policies is that the global institutions can play a key role there and thinking about the SDGs as you can have a kind of 15-year, 30-year plan. And that's what we need to shift, really to shift, have a longer term view of how we shift these, what we're talking about, understandings and then attitudes and then behaviors in order for people to actually decolonize their organizations and think differently and work differently. It is not something we're going to do in a year. So just keeping that in sight. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. We'll just take one more from Lydia, then we'll open up again.
Yeah, so I think we all agree with the diagnosis that to transform agri-food systems, we need to address power imbalances, right? You've all spoken to that. So my question to Javier, since you focus on incentives, how do you incentivize the powerful to become less powerful? So that we address.
Okay, right, let's take this first round. Thanks, Joe, if we can just see. I think, so the first question is this question about what technologies should we incentivize, what kinds of incentive. Petrina, would you like to have a go at that one first? Because you work on STI policy and, you know, your think tank actually debates these questions around, well, what should we be incentivizing and how do different actors get to the table to decide what's incentivized? What's your thoughts on that? Hmm? Yes, you're on. Yeah.
I'm not sure because of rain. I could not hear some of the questions, but what I can say more generally is, you know, whether it is farmers or even companies, they cannot really do on their own. They need policies. Even private companies, they need policies that guide. So the issue of policy is also, we are talking about the issue of evidence also. You cannot make policy if there is no evidence. And evidence is normally produced, for innovation is produced by through research, policy-oriented research. And the challenge for Africa, we don't have a lot of information on that, whether it is on agriculture, science and technology, or any other, because this kind of research is not carried out, and it's not like, it's not under, I don't know whether its role is not understood. It's both by the government and donors, and we don't have, and that is a major problem actually. We don't have information because we do not produce knowledge or data, because the resources for that are not available for most cases, at least for Africa. That's what I can say. There was a question on how do you know, how do you know the democratization is a priority of farmers? I think we are talking about democratization in the sense that you are focusing on the needs of the people. Okay? Farmers know their needs, actually. That is what we have to find out from them. So I think that way they understand that they have to democratize. You have to find out first what are their needs. When we're talking about science, technology, and innovation, and actually even democratizing the system, because science and technology is not applied in vacuum, you have to understand what is the purpose. Why is somebody engaged in food production? You have to understand that first. That is democratization. If you understand, then you can put technology, you can help develop the system so that it actually addresses the needs of the farmers.
Great. Thanks, Petrina. Yes, let's go to Aditya, and then we'll go to Cheshire after that.
Yeah, I want to try to answer the first question. So I think the question is not which technology to incentivize. It's not about which. If there should be incentives, it should be accessible by any innovator. Yes, I think that the most important point is that. And I want to bring up examples from Indonesia. So today, and it has been ongoing for at least the last 2 decades, input subsidies are the largest non-energy subsidies in Indonesia. So after fuel subsidies, the next one is input subsidies. And they have been used to incentivize fertilizers and seeds. So there are discounted fertilizer, free fertilizer, free seeds from the governments every year. Now the problem is there are only selected number of types of fertilizers and varieties of seeds that are eligible to receive these subsidies. And one of the examples being that, and it has been very successful. So one of the latest surveys is found that around 70% of farmers, rice and corn farmers in Indonesia use subsidized fertilizer. So it's very successful, and it's really hard to change. It's really hard to lift. Otherwise, you would risk, crisis, price increases. Yeah. Now, my point is that if you look at the most popular rice varieties in Indonesia, it's those varieties that were released in the 80s, in the 90s. There have been some innovations already, more novel varieties being released, including local varieties released by small seed breeders, but they are not popular because the past practices they tended to stick, and it's very hard to change. So what we are recommending instead, I think, is that if you need to incentivize farmers to reduce their cost of input, then need to make sure that these incentives are received by them directly instead of the large producers. So we're talking about probably more like the social assistance, the cash incentives, conditional cash transfers that are somehow monitored based on their practices. So how sustainably they use these inputs, chemical fertilizer versus organic fertilizer, chemical pesticides versus more organic variations. And then that's how you tweak the incentive. So I think the point is to incentivize farmers instead of to incentivize certain products.
Thank you. Thank you, Aditya. Let's Cheshire, if you'd like, there was a question that was directed to you specifically.
Yeah,
and we
there
have
was a question directed to me, but I think I would like to frame it a little bit differently, that when we talk about democratization here, we are talking about how is this system that develops technology innovation from outside, in your case, in the Indian research institutes and in the companies, and then brought down to farmers. So that's the model that has been used in Punjab as well. But now you're coming with the problems of the Green Revolution, right? So there's dropping yields, the soil is not capable of producing, you're having ecological problems, the food is not diverse, you moved away from that. So I think that if you want to actually come up with innovations, then you have to go down into the communities and find out from them, look for what they are doing, right? That's what we do in ProInnova. We just go with the open slate and walk around and talk to people and say, is there anybody doing something disruptive? Is there anybody doing something strange around here? And then you go there and you find that people are actually experimenting with different things. Those are the people we call local innovators. And then we see, hey, why was the person doing this? And it is always because there's a problem that has come up and they want to sort something out. So there is no fodder for them in the dry season. So what do? So they come up with a way of actually preparing the fodder in the rainy season and keeping it for the dry season. So how do they come up with, what do they do in the mix? So those are the things they're already doing. So then you can get the nutritionist in or the animal scientist in to see how they can work together. So that's what we are talking about, a democratized system where the people who are schooled in agricultural sciences can actually use that to support what farmers are doing. So what you'd have to do is just go out there and see and it will not be a one-size-fits-all solution because every farmer's farm is different. The resources they have are different. The labor they have is different. And I think we have from the system that we have, the dominant system is one size fits all. So it was in the Green Revolution, everybody used this, put so much of fertilizer. Now the bigger farmers could do it and the small farmers couldn't do it and they fell into poverty. So it is, that's why you need such a big change in the way you think about agriculture, in the way you think about development at large, because there is no one-size-fits solution anywhere. And I think you've got to come to grasp that before you can actually do things which actually will bring about well-being, livelihoods, and ecological frameworks that are sustainable.
Great.
If that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean it does, but just wanted to understand it through a few examples, Indian examples or probably examples somewhere outside India.
Well, the Indian example, I mean, a part of our network, we have the group in Kerala, and they have something called a land to lab approach. It is a farmer-based approach. So there are farmers who have developed, let's say, a cardamom cleaning machine or whatever. So it's their own thing. And then the scientists get together with the farmers and see how can we improve this, how can we commercialize this, how can we get the IPR to the farmers themselves, and so on. So you will get a lot of different things happening, and it's not just some bot or somebody coming and selling you one machine, but these are machines that fit the different purposes that the farmers want, and that's what agriculture should be moving towards, the food systems and the science and technology. But what is happening now is because it's so difficult to change that massive system, people are going with the alternative systems like us and like Land to Lab and people who are part of our network. So it's spread out all over the world, and there are like thousands of innovations. And I have to emphasize that for us, it's not the innovation itself that's so important because it's very site-specific. It is the capacity to innovate. So by supporting that, you enable the community to be able to adapt to change and to do their own experimentation. So you build self-confidence because once they have something like that, they say, okay, that one I can do it. And then the woman next door is looking at her and saying, oh, if she can do it, I can do it too. So you have this chain of innovations taking place in a community. And before you know, within 2 years, all of the people in the community have become innovators. They are sorting their problems out. So that is why I also say it's very important to decolonize, because in our countries, we've got used to this system where somebody dictated terms to us. And now we have to release them from that and say, you can dictate your own terms. And that's, I think, it's a political thing. It's empowerment means there is power balances involved. So yeah,
Great.
those are some of my thoughts.
Thanks, Cheshire. And there will be more examples for sure included in our chapter, which is one of the things that there will also be, and there's the website, yeah. Okay, I'm conscious of time. So you said that there was a comment online. It'd be good to pick up, and then we'll just carry on down the line because it would be good also to hear it from Annabelle, Javier, and Fabrizio. Right.
Yeah, so someone said that there's more of a comment than a question. It says, the conversation has revolved around farmers being heard and their knowledge recognized, as if STI was separate from capitalism. Free trade, land grabbing, patenting are hostile environments where farmers have to operate. In my fieldwork, farmers had knowledge of particular innovations that they choose not to initiate because of the economic pressures.
Okay, so it's a good comment to keep in mind, and thanks for that. So we can bring that into our deliberations as well, which I think is very good. There's a question at the back. If I could just take that one too, and then we'll carry on with our sort of final marks as we close in.
Thank you so much. My question was around climate change adaptation. You were mentioning ways to adapt to change locally, and perhaps the debate around climate change adaptation is agroecology versus climate smart agriculture. So perhaps someone can think in the middle are the farmers. So my concrete question is, how can we use climate change adaptation to democratize this, or what are your thoughts about it?
Great question. Thank you. Annabelle, can we continue down the line? You may like to respond to that one about how climate change can be a driver, or any of the previous questions that you had also.
Well, yeah, in general, I think climate change is, we discussed a little bit yesterday about how crises can be enablers of changes. So I think in a way, I think it can be, and it's already there, kind of putting some pressures for change that are favoring the kind of discussions we are having. But I wanted to just make a comment. If these are the final comments. Something that I was thinking out of the discussion is a general comment here also for our work is that, in a way, I mean, we know that things are wrong, and we are based on that doing our recommendations. At the same time, I think it's important not to kind of romanticize so much farmers on the one hand, and them and the opposite. Thank you, of the kind of commercial sector. I know quite a lot of experience coming from the commercial sector of small and medium-sized seed companies in Argentina, which have been doing very interesting things, working together with farmers. Also, science, agricultural science institutions that have done quite a lot of very interesting work. And also, input providers are doing quite a lot to adapt to different circumstances, because they want to capture markets. They want to, I mean, they know of the challenges. So I think in a way also we need to be aware of that, and our work kind of deal with that and not kind of put everything into fixed boxes, because it's not what is happening there. And also because we also work with, we need to work with through collaborations and connecting different parts of the system, not creating kind of parallel system. That's one of the comments I wanted to know. And the other, I think your question is very good about how you incentivize the powerful to be less powerful. But I think in a way, we've been discussing a little bit on that. I mean, it depends on the context, no? But I think in the context of institutions, well, I mean, if I interpret it well, what he's kind of suggesting is that we think ways in which we can incentivize these institutions to introduce these more democratic practices, thinking what will be the instrumental advantages of this democratization. And I think in a way, because of crisis and many things that are going on, even if the more powerful in many ways are not going to be willing to kind of be distributing power around, there are so many things happening that is like, there are advantages even for them, for this democratization, that have to do with issues of legitimacy, that have to do with issues of risk, that have to do with a lot of things. So I think that's what I think, and I could carry on.
Thanks, Annabelle. Javier, I think Annabelle's already going to make a segue to you.
She did, and she covered. No, that's great. You covered some of the points that I wanted to make. I mean, I think there are external and internal drivers for affecting that change or catalyzing the change, and to avoid getting in sort of platitudes, I'll give you sort of concrete examples from one track that can serve as a space for incentivizing democratization in STI, which is through partnerships. And within that strand of partnerships, acknowledging that that's just one track of work, there's sort of three spaces that we're looking at. We're looking at it from the lens of opportunity and really making the case internally to our community that the success of the organization is underpinned by the success of partners as one key driver of a discussion that's taking place internally, but also demonstrating from an opportunity sense as well that it really helps the organization to determine how it invests and divests its resources based on its comparative advantage, right? And it's if you understand what you're good at, then you seek partnerships with others who do better at other things that you're not so good at. And even if you're good at something, over time, you may want to divest in that space and allow others or facilitate the spaces for others to be able to play more active roles in that. And so there's an opportunity dimension that needs to be looked at that can serve as a driver for internal change. The second one is mandate. And in our case, we actually created what we call an engagement framework for partnerships, which outlines a series of approaches and engagement principles, which has become the land of the law. Sorry, the law of the land. And it basically, at this stage, it sits at the highest level of the policy framework of the organization. Eventually, it'll have to be derived in a series of policies and practices and procedures, et cetera, but it really sets a very strong political message that partnerships are fundamental to the well-being of the organization and that we were going to move in that direction. That's an important strand of work towards democratization. Also, as part of our mandate, we actually established a high-level advisory panel on global stakeholder engagement, which was constituted almost entirely, 11 out of 12 members by representatives from the Global South. And we asked them, this was an appointment made by our system, by the board of the system, to provide a series of recommendations in terms of how we can do better in terms of partnering, particularly with the Global South. And that's become also a mandate for the organization to follow. So, mandate's a critical element there. And the other one is risk mitigation. Truth is that if you're occasionally and sometimes constantly being hammered, particularly by partners in the Global South, with saying, you really need to step up and do better. There's a reputational risk that needs to be embedded into your thinking and the calculus of how the organization operates. Because that reputational risk can lead to financial risk as well, because then funders can turn around and say, I really don't like the noise that this is being generated around you, and so I'm going to step away from you. And so those are sort of three internal strands in terms of making the case for opportunity, having mandates to behave better, and also mitigating risk. Externally, it's the third one, the last point that I was saying in terms of, funders can turn around, and many of the funders do. The International Climate Initiative from Germany says that 50% of your funding, if you receive resources, has to go to partners from the Global South. So you could be told also externally, you can have pressures imposed that make sure that you're behaving better. I mean, so all of these things are just illustrations from a particular partnership strand of how you can facilitate certain behaviors that could lead to more democratization in the SEI space.
Great, thanks. And we're just coming to the end now of the conversation. How time flew, it went very quickly. Fabrizio, I think you're going to get the last opportunity.
Okay. Well, I just like to address a couple of questions that have been raised. The one about long-term planning and what can international organizations do in that case. In the case of FAO, I would say some of the, first of all, one thing that an organization like FAO can do is actually help setting agendas, right? And this is a very powerful mechanism when it works, because it's a way of creating coalitions of like-minded partners, but also a way to bring stakeholders around a table over the longer term, right? And it's about setting problems and issues that are, continues to receive attention for some time. But the other aspect is also that, an organization like FAO has, for example, presence in countries, right? So we do have FAO representations, and I forgot now the number of countries, but we are beyond 100. And unfortunately, when it comes to STI, the reality is that the organization has been losing the capacity to actually engage in that conversation, in that space, right? The mechanism is there, And actually, part of the objective of the ATIO initiative is finally, to give back tools to the FAO country offices. Not all of them, of course, have faced the same situation, but to give the tools to basically engage and support the dialogue, because there is a lot of convening power that FAO has down at the local level that can be leveraged in a useful way. And then, without mentioning the fact that now the UN system has these sustainable development cooperation frameworks, which are useful instruments, right, to coordinate better the intervention of the UN agencies in the development efforts at the local national level. And that also is an area space where FAO has quite a bit of an important role to play. And so these are just illustrations of mechanisms that are available. The question is to give them the ability to make to bite into the issues, right? Then the other point about the climate change, I think the democratization and climate change have, when it comes to STI, have a very close link. Leaving aside the mitigation agenda, you have the adaptation one, right? And the adaptation has to be necessarily done at a local level. So and this is important because when you think about the role of information in terms of guiding investments in adaptation and using technologies and innovations to support adaptation, well, no, there is the whole question about what kind of information fits into the selection of those technologies innovations, right? So if this information is something that comes from the top towards the bottom, it will not work. It needs to be a bottom-up process. And now the question about how do you generate that information, how do you channel it into the policy processes, how do you use it to leverage the resources, inevitably requires a democratized process for that to happen. I would say that I would take on that.
Thanks, Fabrizio. So we have come to the end. As probably everyone who's in the room and is listening online can realize, this is a topic that we can talk a great deal about because it's been exercising our minds just amongst ourselves in the group, those who are in the room here sitting at the panel, and a wider set of colleagues are really grappling with some quite challenging ideas. I don't think any of us are assuming that this is a straightforward, easy path towards some ideal utopian future, but we do recognize that there are genuine challenges that we believe need to be addressed. And as this event that we're part of at the moment continues, we're going to be grappling a little bit more to try to identify, what are some of those ways in which we can actually promote movement towards a kind of progressive change towards a different future. And we hope that this will materialize in a really interesting report that will come out next year. The ATIO report itself will be out, I think, in the middle of next year, Fabrizio. October 2025, so a year from now, so put that in your diaries. But we'll also be having other outputs from our work in other forms as well. There'll be a background paper, and we hope there'll be a lot more opportunities for engagement. So as the work continues, we'll have more conversations, and we certainly invite you to be part of those. So thank you to all those who joined today. Thank you who joined online. Yes, the conversation continues. Thanks very much indeed. Wait,